this is one of those topics, like, because I hear people talk about DISC and other things. I think it's one of those topics that's really, really cool. I think because we do Enneagram too, which I think there's some value in that as well. So I think each of these tests, they have value for them. I mean, I don't know all the tests, but I know a lot of them. I think they all have value. They just have they're different tools for different things. And so I wouldn't say Kolbe is better than DISC, is better than Enneagram. I think they're just different tests, different assessments, different thing. They measure different things. So what we have to know, though, is we've got to design, and we'll probably do some of these I'll probably test out DISC too, just to see what that information gives us. Because I know that Brian Mitten is someone that is, a big believer in DISC. But what we have to know is we have to design these rules around the strengths instead of control. A big mistake that I see, and I've seen this since the beginning, ever since I heard about the attorney that made their, not to call them out, I'm not going to mention their name, but they made their employees put their phones in their lockers at the beginning of the day, and they couldn't get them out unless it was on a break or lunch or at the end of the day. That's control. That's what that is. It's still crazy to me, but you have to design these rules around strengths and not control. So think about, ask some questions, where do people stall for no obvious reason? Where do they move fast without really being asked to do things? Which roles exist to make management easier and which ones, are not really working, right? So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. Especially when it comes to management, what exists to make things easier, management easier, and what things are compared to not making it better, right? So you're making management easier is one thing, but making management better is different. And there's a big distinction there. So maybe ask these questions as to what rules do you have in place that just makes management easier, okay, but doesn't make it better. Okay. So, I think once we kind of get this dialed in a little bit better, it's going to make effort not be as, hard. I guess, I don't know a better way of putting it. I think we're going to see probably increased output, which I think is interesting. You're going to see a decrease in friction. Now, when I talk about that friction, I do talk about you need to naturally increase some friction, and that's from a world without email. There is some friction you need when it comes to communication, but whenever friction in the role itself and the tasks themselves, that's a little bit different. So, because what we're ultimately trying to do is we're trying to increase the culture. Culture is really, really important. So we want to improve the culture, not increase the culture. We want to improve culture. I think that we should always be focused on that. And part of that is decreasing the friction in those tasks. It's really important. So, and it's not really about controlling chaos or anything like that. It's really about creating some intentional flexibility in the roles. I think that's an important part of this too. Instead of having these rigid rules, having some intentional flexibility could be pretty important. But so I think that this is really, really important. I think that law firms are generally built on rules and precision. That's a big part of some of the things that law firms are built on. There really are lots of rules, right? We have rules that we're guided by. We have rules of evidence. We've got statutes, things like that. We create all these rules and policies and procedures in our firms. And so it makes over standardization really tempting. It really does. But what really matters the most, if you think about it, it's judgment and initiative. Really, judgment and initiative. So if you can kind of figure that part out, that matters most. And you combine that with, how do certain people instinctually react to certain situations. I think what you're going to see is just a lot less burnout in your firms. And you're going to see a lot less exhaustion in you and in your team. And you're going to see a lot more alignment in your goals. But I don't want to overstate this, because I think that this is sometimes what happens, and it doesn't matter what it is. You name the tool, right? If you could go on Becca's list and it could say, this is the best software for this, right? This is the silver bullet. That's not true. Kolbe's not a silver bullet either. like I said, it's one assessment of many that does one thing. So don't think that you're gonna bring on Kolbe and Kolbe is gonna solve all of the firm's problems. That is not what I'm saying at all. I think you should take the information that you get from it, use it the way it's supposed to be used, and that's it. Okay, it's not a magic elixir. Okay, so don't think of it that way. It's going to Instead, it's going to be a tool that you use. It's going to allow you to stop blaming people for doing things incorrectly or, thinking it's one thing when it's actually another thing. It's going to give you additional information to see, okay, maybe their energy is better placed over here and not over there. Or maybe this person, it's simply an instruction issue where we're not giving them enough detail in this role because they're more of a fact finder. They need to know more about this particular project, and we need to give them more instructions. What was interesting about the last number is implementer. I don't want to get off too far off track, but something I learned was implementer is not what I thought it was. Implement is not like you take something and you implement it into the whatever, right? So what I always thought it was is that we have this new system that we create, and the implementer is really good about implementing that into the system, into the firm, right? That's not at all what it is. It is actually the implementor. So it's not implementer. Christine pointed that out. It's an implementor, OR. It's that person's ability to, and I don't know how this makes any sense with the name, but whatever. It's that person's ability to actually interact in the real world. So the tactile world, ability to like touch and move things and all that. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So I'm a 6 on that, 5, 3, 6, 6. But I can also, that's one of those ones I think I can move up and down that scale. And I'd asked her about, well, does that mean like, building software and all that? And she said, maybe a little bit, but not really. They're really talking about what's happening in the real world, things you can see, touch, taste, all that kind of stuff, which I thought was really interesting. Really interesting distinction. So I think this is something that I may talk about at Max Law Con this year. I don't know. It's part of this conversation I'm going to have with her this week. We'll see. Because part of this, I may just, have conversations with people in the hall out of Max Law Con. That may just be what I do, or it's something that may come up during masterminds and all that. I think it's a really cool topic. I'm very curious to see how other people are using it because, I know there's a lot of value in it. We've been using Kolbe for a while. And I know that Amy and Kristen in our firm, they use it they think about it way more than I do, but this is just sort of a wake up call for me. I'm glad we did the training because it's a wake up call for me to use it more. And so I'm meeting with Christine again this week. I'm very curious. It's not like I need the answers. I'm very curious. She's very curious, which makes me excited. So we're both very curious about, what we're going to learn. I think important lesson from all this, though, you don't need to redesign everything overnight. I don't plan on redesigning everything overnight. I'm thinking about everything, but the big thing is identifying these energy patterns. Because once you do it, you're not gonna be able to unsee them. I promise you. Because we have in Click, Zoho Click, which is where we chat with each other's numbers, and you're like, oh, that makes complete sense when you look at it more. And so I'll make sure I pay more attention to that because we've had those in there for a while, but really interesting. I think it's interesting stuff. But identify those energy patterns. I think it's going to, take you a really long way. I really do. I think it's really, really important. But just remember, maybe the goal isn't to make everyone work the same way. Maybe it's just to let people work the way they're wired.